We have built upon the substantial work carried out by the joint inquiry of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. We've obtained excellent cooperation from the CIA, the FBI, and the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Justice. They made significant material available for the preparation of this statement. I'd like to draw you now to page 2 of the statement, beginning with the spring of 2001, and turn the floor over to Chris Kojum, my deputy.
In spring 2001, the level of reporting on terrorist threats and planned attacks began to increase dramatically, representing the most significant spike in activity since the millennium. At the end of March, the intelligence community disseminated a terrorist threat advisory indicating there was a heightened threat of Sunni extremist terrorist attacks against U.S. facilities, personnel, and other interests in the coming weeks. In April and May 2001, the drumbeat of reporting increased. Articles presented to top officials contained headlines such as, quote, bin Laden planning multiple operations, close quote, quote, bin Laden public profile may presage attack, close quote, quote, bin Laden networks plans advancing, close quote. By late May, there were reports of a hostage plot against Americans to force the release of prisoners, including Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, who was serving a life sentence for his role in the 1993 plot to blow up sites in New York City. The reporting noted that the operatives may opt to hijack an aircraft or storm a U.S. embassy. The reporting also mentioned that Abu Zubaydah was planning an attack and expected to carry out more if things went well. The U.S. government redoubled efforts, ongoing since late 1999, to capture Abu Zubaydah. National Counterterrorism Coordinator Clark also called National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice's attention to possible plots in Yemen and Italy and by an alleged cell in Canada that might be planning an attack against the United States. Reports similar to these were made available to President Bush in morning meetings with DCI Tenet, usually attended by Vice President Cheney and National Security Advisor Rice as well. None of these reports mention that the attacks might occur in the United States. At the end of May, Counterterrorism Center Chief Cofer Black told Rice that the current threat level was a 7 on a scale of 10 as compared to an 8 during the millennium. The threat reports surged again in June and July, reaching an even higher peak of urgency. A terrorist threat advisory in late June indicated that there was a high probability of near-term spectacular terrorist attacks resulting in numerous casualties. Headlines from intelligence reports were stark. Quote, bin Laden threats are real, close quote. Quote, bin Laden planning high-profile attacks, close quote. The intelligence reporting consistently described the upcoming attacks as occurring on a catastrophic level, indicating that they would cause the world to be in turmoil, consisting of possible multiple, but not necessarily simultaneous attacks. A late June report stated that bin Laden operatives expect near-term attacks to have dramatic consequences of catastrophic proportion. Rice told us Clark and his counterterrorism and security group were the nerve center in coordinating responses, but that principals were also involved. In addition to his daily meetings with President Bush and weekly meetings to go over other issues with National Security Advisor Rice, Tenet continued his regular meetings with Secretary Powell and Secretary Rumsfeld. The foreign policy principals talked on the phone every day on a variety of subjects, including the threat. The summer threats seemed to be focused on Saudi Arabia, Israel, Bahrain, Kuwait, Yemen, and possibly Rome, but the danger could be anywhere, including a possible attack on the G8 summit in Genoa, where air defense measures were taken. Disruption operations were launched involving 20 countries. Several terrorist operatives were detained by foreign governments, possibly disrupting operations in the Gulf and Italy, and perhaps averting attacks against 2 or 3 U.S. embassies. U.S. armed forces in at least 6 countries were placed on higher alert. Units of the Fifth Fleet were redeployed. Embassies were alerted. Vice President Cheney contacted Crown Prince Abdullah to get more Saudi help. DCI Tenet phoned or met with approximately 20 top security officials from other countries. Deputy National Security Advisor Hadley apparently called European counterparts. Clark worked with senior officials in the Gulf. At Rice's request, on July 5th, the CIA briefed Attorney General John Ashcroft on the al-Qaeda threat, warning that a significant terrorist attack was imminent and a strike could occur at any time. That same day, officials from domestic agencies, including the Federal Aviation Administration, met with Clark to discuss the current threat. Rice worked directly with Tenet on security issues for the G8 summit. In addition to the individual reports, on July 11th, top officials received a summary recapitulating the mass of al-Qaeda-related threat reporting on several continents. Tenet told us that in his world, quote, the system was blinking red, close quote, and by late July, it could not have been any worse. Tenet told us he felt that President Bush and other officials grasped the urgency of what they were being told. On July 27th, Clark informed Rice and Hadley that the spike in signals intelligence about a near-term attack had stopped. He urged keeping readiness high during the August vacation period, warning that another report suggested an attack had just been postponed for a few months. On August 3rd, the intelligence community issued a threat advisory warning that the threat of impending al-Qaeda attacks would likely continue indefinitely. The advisory cited threats in the Arabian Peninsula, Jordan, Israel, and Europe, and suggested that al-Qaeda was lying in wait and searching for gaps in security before moving forward with the planned attacks. During the spring and summer of 2001, President Bush had occasionally asked his briefers whether any of the threats pointed to the United States. Reflecting on these questions, the CIA decided to write a briefing article summarizing its understanding of this danger. The article, which the President received on August 6th, is attached to this staff statement. Despite the large number of threats received, there were no specifics regarding time, place, method, or target. Disruption efforts continued. An al-Qaeda associate from North Africa connected to Abu Zubaydah was arrested in the United Arab Emirates on August 13th. He had apparently been planning an attack against the U.S. Embassy in Paris. CIA analysts who have recently reviewed the threat surge of the summer of 2001 told us they believe it may have been related to a separate stream of events. These threats may have been referring to the 9/11 attack, the planned assassination of Northern Alliance leader Ahmed Shah Massoud, or other operations. In July 2001, the CSG alerted federal law enforcement agencies and asked the FAA to send out security advisories. Beginning on July 27th, the FAA issued several security directives to U.S. air carriers prior to September 11th. In addition, the FAA issued a number of general warnings about potential threats, primarily overseas, to civil aviation. None of these warnings required the implementation of additional aviation security measures. They urged air carriers to be alert. Although there was no credible evidence of an attack in the United States, Clark told us, the CSG arranged for the CIA to brief senior intelligence and security officials from the domestic agencies. The head of counterterrorism at the FBI, Dale Watson, said he had many discussions about possible attacks with Cofer Black at the CIA. They had expected an attack on July 4th. Watson said he felt deeply that something was going to happen, but he told us the threat information was nebulous. He wished he had known more. He wished he had had, quote, 500 analysts looking at Osama bin Laden threat information instead of 2, close quote. Rice and Hadley told us that, before September 11th, they did not feel they had the job of handling domestic security. They felt Clark and the CSG were the National Security Council's bridge between foreign and domestic threats. In late August, working-level CIA and FBI officials realized that one or more al-Qaeda operatives might be in the United States. We have found no evidence that this discovery was ever briefed to the CSG, to principals, or to senior counterterrorism officials at the FBI or the CIA. Nor was the White House told about the arrest of Zacarias Moussaoui. We investigated awareness of the terrorist threat within the Department of Justice and the FBI during the spring and summer of 2001. Rice told us that she believed the FBI had tasked its 56 U.S. field offices to increase surveillance of suspected terrorists and to reach out to informants who might have information about terrorist plots. An NSC document at the time described such a tasking having occurred in late June, although it does not indicate whether the tasking was generated by the NSC or the FBI. At this point, we have found the following. On April 13th, FBI headquarters alerted field offices to a heightened threat from al-Qaeda against U.S. interests. The communication detailed the threats against U.S. interests abroad, but made no mention of any possible threat inside the United States. The field offices were asked to, quote, task all resources to include electronic databases and human sources for any information pertaining to the current operational activities relating to Sunni extremism, close quote. On July 2nd, the FBI Counterterrorism Division sent a message to federal agencies and state and local law enforcement agencies that summarized information regarding threats against U.S. interests from bin Laden. The message reported that there was an increased volume of threat reporting indicating a potential for attacks against U.S. targets abroad from groups aligned with or sympathetic to Osama bin Laden. It further stated, quote, the FBI has no information indicating a credible threat of terrorist attack in the United States, close quote. However, it went on to emphasize that the possibility of attack in the United States could not be discounted. It also noted that the July 4th holiday might heighten the threats. The report asked the recipients to, quote, exercise vigilance, close quote, and, quote, report suspicious activities, close quote, to the FBI. Acting FBI Director Thomas Pickard recently told us that during his summer telephone calls with special agents in charge of each FBI field office, he mentioned to each the heightened threat, among other subjects. He also told us that he had a conference call with all special agents in charge on July 19th, in which one of the items he mentioned was that they needed to have their evidence response teams ready to move at a moment's notice in case they needed to respond to an attack. We found in our field office visits last fall, however, that a number of FBI personnel, with the exception of those in the New York field office, did not recall a heightened sense of threat from al-Qaeda within the United States in summer 2001. For example, an international terrorism squad supervisor in the Washington field office told us that he was neither aware in summer 2001 of an increased threat, nor did his squad take any special steps or actions. The special agent in charge of the Miami field office told us he did not learn of the high level of threat until after September 11th. Pickard said in late June and through July he met with Attorney General Ashcroft once a week. He told us that although he initially briefed the Attorney General regarding these threats, after 2 such briefings, the Attorney General told him he did not want to hear this information anymore. The Justice Department has informed us that Attorney General Ashcroft, his former deputy, and his Chief of Staff deny that the Attorney General made any such statement to Pickard. Ashcroft told us that he asked Pickard whether there was intelligence about attacks in the United States. Pickard said he replied that he could not assure Ashcroft that there would be no attacks in the United States, although the reports of threats were related to overseas targets. Ashcroft said he therefore assumed that the FBI was doing what it needed to do. He acknowledged that, in retrospect, this was a dangerous assumption. Prior to 9/11, neither Ashcroft nor his predecessors received a copy of the President's daily brief. After 9/11, Ashcroft began to receive portions of the brief that relate to counterterrorism.
It is in this context that we return to the story of Mihdhar and Hazmi. While top officials in Washington were receiving and reacting to various threat reports, we need to step further down in the bureaucracy to trace a now significant story of how particular al-Qaeda associates were addressed by lower-level officials. In Staff Statement Number 2, presented at our January hearing, we discussed the complex story of successes and failures in tracking and identifying hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Nawaf's brother Salim al-Hazmi, and the coal bomber Khalid. Those efforts had trailed off in January 2000. No one at CIA headquarters reacted to the March 2000 cable from Bangkok that someone named Nawaf al-Hazmi had traveled to the United States. But there were 3 episodes in 2001 when the CIA and/or the FBI had apparent opportunities to refocus on the significance of Hazmi and Mihdhar and reinvigorate the search for them. As in the 2000 story, the details are complex. We turn to the first episode, which is in January 2001, the identification of Khalid. Almost 1 year after the original trail had been lost in Bangkok, the January 2000 rendezvous of suspected terrorists in Kuala Lumpur resurfaced. The FBI and the CIA learned from a conspirator in the USS Cole attack in Yemen that a person he knew as Khalad had helped direct the Cole bombing. One of the members of the FBI's investigative team in Yemen realized he had previously heard of Khalad from a joint FBI-CIA source who had said Khalad was close to bin Laden. Khalad was also linked to the East Africa bombings in 1998. The FBI agent obtained from a foreign government a photo of the person believed to have directed the Cole bombing. The joint source confirmed the man in that photograph was the same Khalad he had described. In December 2000, based on some analysis of information associated with Khalid al-Midhar, the CIA's bin Laden station speculated that Khalad and Khalid al-Midhar might be one and the same. So, the CIA asked that a Kuala Lumpur surveillance photo of Midhar be shown to the joint source, who had already identified an official photograph of Khalad. In early January 2001, 2 photographs from the Kuala Lumpur meeting were shown to the joint source. One was a known photograph of Midhar, the other a photograph of an unknown subject. The joint source did not recognize Midhar, but he indicated he was 90% certain that the other individual was Khalad. This meant that Khalad and Midhar were 2 different people, but the fact that both had attended the meeting in Kuala Lumpur also meant there was a link between Khalad, a suspected leader in the Cole bombing, the Kuala Lumpur meeting, and Midhar. Despite this new information, we found no effort by the CIA to renew the long-abandoned search for Midhar or his travel companions. In addition, we found that the CIA did not notify the FBI of this identification until late August. DCI Tennant and Cofer Black testified before the joint inquiry that the FBI had access to this information from the beginning. But based on extensive record, including documents that were not available to the CIA personnel who drafted that testimony, we conclude they were in error. The FBI's primary Cole investigators had no knowledge of Khalad's possible participation in the Kuala Lumpur meeting until after the September 11 attacks. This is an example of how day-to-day gaps in information sharing can emerge even in a situation of goodwill on all sides. The information was from a joint FBI-CIA source. The source spoke essentially no English. The FBI person on the scene overseas did not speak the languages the source spoke. Due to travel and security issues, the amount of time spent with the source was necessarily kept short. As a result, the CIA officer usually did not simultaneously translate either the questions or the answers for his accompanying FBI colleague and friend. For interviews without such simultaneous translation, the FBI agent on the scene received copies of the reports that the CIA disseminated to other agencies, but he was not given access to the CIA's internal operational traffic that contained more detail. The information regarding the January 2001 identification of Khalad was only reported in operational traffic, to which the relevant FBI investigators did not have access. The CIA officer does not recall this particular identification and thus cannot say why it was not shared with his FBI colleague. But he may have misunderstood the possible significance of the new identification. Midhar left the United States in June 2000. It is possible that if in January 2001 agencies had resumed their search for him or placed him on the tip-off watch list, they might have found him before or at the time Midhar applied for a new visa in June 2001. Or they might have been alerted to him when he returned to the United States the following month. We cannot know. The second opportunity is in the spring of 2001, looking again at Kuala Lumpur. By mid-May 2001, as the threat reports were surging again, a CIA official detailed to the International Terrorism Operations Section at the FBI wondered where the attacks might occur. We will call him John. John recalled the Kuala Lumpur travel of Midhar and his associates around the millennium. He searched the CIA's databases for information regarding the travel. On May 15th, he and another official at CIA re-examined many of the old cables from early 2000, including the information that Midhar had a U.S. visa and that Hazmi had come to Los Angeles on January 15, 2000. The CIA official who reviewed the cables took no action regarding these cables. She cannot recall this work. John, however, began a lengthy exchange with a CIA analyst to figure out what these cables meant. He recognized the relationship to the bombing case, and he was aware that someone had identified Khalid in one of the surveillance photographs from the Malaysia meeting. He concluded that something bad was definitely up. Despite the U.S. links evident in this traffic, John did not raise that aspect with his FBI counterparts. He was focused on Malaysia. John's focus on the overseas target area might be understood from his description of the CIA as an agency that tended to play a zone defense. In contrast, he said, the FBI tends to play man-to-man. Desk officers at the CIA's bin Laden station did not have cases in the same sense as an FBI agent who works something beginning to end. Thus, when the trail went cold after the Kuala Lumpur meeting in January 2000, the desk officer moved on to different things. By the time the March 2000 cable arrived with information that one of the travelers had flown to Los Angeles, the case officer was not responsible for following up on that information. While several individuals at the bin Laden station opened the cable when it arrived in March 2000, it was no one's concern, and no action was taken. We discussed some of the management issues raised by this in January in Staff Statement Number 2. The CIA's zone defense concentrated on where, not who. Had its information been shared with the FBI, a combination of the CIA's zone defense and the FBI's man-to-man approach might have been far more productive. The third opportunity is in August 2001, when the search for Hazmi and Midhar begins and fails. During the summer of 2001, John asked an FBI official detailed to the CIA to review all of the Kuala Lumpur materials one more time. We will call her Mary. He asked her to do the research in her free time. She began her work on July 24th. That day, she found the cable reporting that Midhar had a visa to the United States. A week later, she found the cable reporting that Midhar's visa application, what was later discovered to be his first application, listed New York as his destination. On August 21st, she located the March 2000 cable that noted with interest that Hazmi had flown to Los Angeles in January 2000. She grasped the significance of this information. Mary and an FBI analyst working the case, whom we will call Jane, promptly met with an INS representative at FBI headquarters. On August 22nd, INS told them that Midhar had entered the United States on January 15, 2000, and again on July 4, 2001. Jane and Mary also learned that there was no record that Hazmi had left since January 2000, but they were not certain if he was still here and assumed that he had left with Midhar in June 2000. They decided that if Midhar was in the United States, he should be found. They divided up the work. Mary asked the bin Laden station to draft a cable requesting that Midhar and Hazmi be put on the tip-off watch list. Jane took responsibility for the search effort inside the United States. As the information indicated that Midhar had last arrived in New York, and this was determined to be related to the bin Laden case in New York, she began drafting a lead for the FBI's New York field office. She called an agent in New York to give him a heads up on the matter, but her draft lead was not sent until August 28th. Her email told the New York agent that she wanted to get him started on this as soon as possible, but she labeled the lead as routine. A routine designation informs the receiving office it has 30 days to respond to the lead. The agent who received the lead forwarded it to a squad supervisor. That same day, the supervisor forwarded the lead to an intelligence agent to open an intelligence case. He also sent it to the cold case agents and an agent who had spent significant time in Malaysia searching for another Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The suggested goal of the investigation was to locate Midhar, determine his contacts and reasons for being in the United States, and possibly conduct an interview. Before sending the lead, Jane had discussed it with John, the CIA official on detail to the FBI, and with the acting head of the FBI's bin Laden unit. The discussion apparently was limited to whether the search should be classified as an intelligence investigation or as a criminal one. A legally important distinction for reasons we explained earlier today in Staff Statement Number 9. Neither of these individuals apparently disagreed with the analyst's proposed plan. No one apparently felt they needed to inform higher levels of management in either the FBI or the CIA about the case. One of the Cole case agents read the lead with interest and contacted Jane to obtain more information. Jane took the position, however, that because the agent was a designated criminal agent, the wall kept him from participating in any search for Midhar. In fact, she felt he had to destroy his copy of the lead because it contained information she believed could not be shared with any criminal agents. The joint inquiry covered the details of their heated exchanges, and we will not repeat them here. The result was that criminal agents who were knowledgeable about the Cole and experienced with criminal investigative techniques, including finding suspects and possible criminal charges, were excluded from the search. Many witnesses have suggested that even if Midhar had been found, there was nothing the agents could have done except follow him onto the planes. We believe this is incorrect. Both Hazmi and Midhar could have been held for various immigration violations or as material witnesses in the Cole bombing case. Investigation or interrogation of these individuals and their travel and financial activities also may have yielded evidence of connections to other participants in the 9/11 plot. In any case, the opportunity did not arise. Notably, the lead did not draw any connections between the threat reporting that had been coming in for months and the presence of two possible al-Qaeda operatives in the United States. Moreover, there is no evidence that the issue was substantively discussed at any level above a deputy chief of a section within the Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters. The search was assigned to one FBI agent for whom this was his very first counterterrorism lead. By the terms of the lead, he was given 30 days to open an intelligence case and make some unspecified efforts to locate Midhar. He started the process a week later. He checked local New York indices for criminal record and driver's license information and checked the hotel listed on Midhar's U.S. entry form. On September 11, the agent sent a lead to Los Angeles based on the fact that Midhar had initially arrived in Los Angeles in January 2000. Time had run out on the search. We want to briefly mention two other incidents in the summer of 2001. The first, the Phoenix Memo. The Phoenix Memo was investigated at length by the Joint Inquiry. We recap it briefly in the statement that's provided to you. I just want to mention now, as its author told us, the Phoenix Memo was not an alert about suicide pilots. His worry was more about a Pan Am 103 scenario in which explosives were placed on an aircraft. The memo's references to aviation training were broad, including electronics and aircraft maintenance. And lastly, Moussaoui. On August 15, 2001, the Minneapolis FBI field office initiated an intelligence investigation on Zacarias Moussaoui. He had entered the country on February 23, 2001, and began flight lessons at Airman Flight School in Oklahoma City. He began flight training at the Pan American Flight Training School in Minneapolis on August 13th. Moussaoui had none of the usual qualifications for flight training on Pan Am's Boeing 747 flight simulators. Contrary to popular belief, Moussaoui did not say he was not interested in learning how to take off or land. Instead, he stood out because, with little knowledge of flying, he wanted to learn or take off and land a Boeing 747. The FBI agent who handled the case in conjunction with the INS representative on the Minneapolis Joint Terrorism Task Force suspected Moussaoui of wanting to hijack planes. Because Moussaoui was a French national who had overstayed his visa, he was detained by the INS. The FBI agent sent a summary of his investigation to FBI headquarters on August 18. In his message, he requested assistance from the FBI field office in Oklahoma City and from the FBI legal attaché in Paris. Each of these offices responded quickly. By August 24th, the Minneapolis agent had also contacted a detailee from the FBI and a CIA analyst at the Counterterrorist Center about the case. DCI Tennant was briefed about the Moussaoui case. He told us no connection to al-Qaeda was apparent to him before 9/11. Moussaoui had lived in London, so the Minneapolis agent also requested assistance from the legal attaché in London. The legal attaché promptly prepared a written request to the British government for information concerning Moussaoui and hand-delivered the request on August 21st. He informed the British of developments in the case on September 4th. The case, although handled expeditiously at the American end, was not handled by the British as a priority amid a large number of other terrorist-related inquiries. On September 11th, after the attacks, the legal attaché renewed his request for information. After 9/11, the British government, in response to U.S. requests, supplied some basic biographical information about Moussaoui. The British government has informed us that it also tasked intelligence collection facilities for information potentially relating to Moussaoui. On September 13th, the British received new, sensitive intelligence that Moussaoui had attended an al-Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan. It passed this intelligence to the United States that same day. Had this information been available in late August 2001, the Moussaoui case would almost certainly have received intense and much higher level attention. Prior to 9/11, there was a continuing dispute between FBI agents in Minneapolis and supervisors at headquarters about whether evidence had been sufficient to seek a FISA warrant to search Moussaoui's computer hard drive and belongings. After 9/11, the FBI learned that Millennium terrorist Rassam, who was cooperating with investigators, could have recognized Moussaoui from the Afghan camps. Either the British information or the Rassam identification would have broken that logjam. A maximum U.S. effort to investigate Moussaoui could conceivably have unearthed his connections to the Hamburg cell, though this might have required an extensive effort with help from foreign governments. The publicity about the threat also might have disrupted the plot, but this would have been a race against time.
To close up, Commissioners, the remainder of the statement covers three other topics, which we will not try to deliver orally here. The first of those is information issues. We itemize in our statement 5 information issues that are lessons that we have gathered from this story. Second, we offer a preliminary finding on a post-9/11 events. We offer our preliminary findings on the flights of Saudi nationals leaving the United States after 9/11, which has been a focus of some public attention. And finally, as part of the issues of threat and response in 2001, we describe some of the immigration law enforcement initiatives that were undertaken by Attorney General Ashcroft with the FBI and at times with other cabinet departments to try to disrupt terrorist activities using immigration laws after 9/11. That material is available in our staff statements, and with that we conclude.